In the 1960s, the space race was in full swing. While the USA and the Soviet Union were fighting to reach the moon, another, much deeper competition was happening under their feet. The Soviets wanted to do the opposite of NASA. They wanted to be the first to reach the moho, the boundary between the Earth's crust and the mantle. In 1970, on the remote Kola Peninsula near the Arctic Circle, they began drilling a hole that would eventually become the deepest man-made point on the planet. They called it the Kola Superdeep Borehole. The goal was scientific, but it was also a matter of national pride. The Soviets wanted to see what the Earth was actually made of, rather than just guessing. They built a massive facility and a drilling rig as tall as a 20-story building. They weren't just drilling a hole, they were building a time machine. Every meter they went down was like traveling back thousands of years into the Earth's geological history. But as the drill went deeper and deeper, the Earth began to fight back in ways the scientists never expected. The target was 15,000 meters. For the first few years, the drilling went smoothly. The equipment was the best the Soviet Union could produce. But the further they went, the stranger the rocks became. They found layers of stone that shouldn't have been there, and they discovered water at depths where it was supposed to be impossible for liquid to exist. It was like the Earth was hiding secrets that it didn't want humans to find. By the time they passed 7,000 meters, the Kola Superdeep was already a world record. But the deeper they pushed, the more the project began to feel like an invasion of a forbidden place. The heat was rising, the pressure was mounting, and soon the rumors began to spread among the workers. They weren't just drilling into rock anymore, they were drilling into the unknown. And some believed they were getting dangerously close to something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. As the drill bit past the 10,000-meter mark, the scientists at Kola entered a world that no human had ever touched. At these depths, the pressure is so intense that it changes the very nature of the Earth. They expected the rock to be solid and cold, but instead, they found something terrifying. The temperature was rising much faster than their models predicted. By the time they reached 12,000 meters, the sensors were reading nearly 180 degrees Celsius, about 356 degrees Fahrenheit. This heat created a nightmare for the engineers. At that temperature, the rock stopped acting like a solid stone and started acting like plastic. Every time they stopped the drill to change a part, the hole would slowly begin to squeeze shut, like a wound trying to heal. The drill bits, made of the strongest steel alloys, began to warp and melt. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were trying to drill through hot taffy rather than granite. But the heat wasn't the only surprise. At 7,000 meters, they found something that shocked the scientific world: liquid water. Geologists believed that at such depths and pressures, water could not exist in liquid form. Yet it was there, squeezed out of the rocks like sweat. Even more incredible, they found microscopic fossils of ancient plankton preserved in the stone miles below the surface. Life, it seemed, had left its mark much deeper than anyone had ever dreamed. Despite the technical triumphs, the project was becoming a battle against the Earth's internal energy. The machines were breaking down constantly, the cost was exploding, and in the dark, cramped tunnels of the facility, the workers began to talk. The extreme heat, the strange sounds echoing up the drill pipe, and the sheer depth started to play tricks on their minds. They had gone further than anyone in history, but the rock was getting softer, hotter, and much more mysterious. By the late 1980s, the Kola project was no longer just a scientific mission, it was becoming a source of fear. As the drill reached over 12,000 meters, strange reports began to leak out of the facility. According to a story that would soon spread across the world, the scientists decided to lower a specialized, heat-resistant microphone down the shaft to record the sounds of the Earth's shifting plates. They expected to hear the low hum of tectonic movements. Instead, they heard something that froze their blood. The legend claims that the microphone captured the sound of thousands of human voices screaming in pain. It sounded like a crowded stadium filled with people being tortured. The story, which later became known as the well-to-hell legend, claimed that the drill had broken through a hollow cavity and the temperature inside had suddenly jumped to over 1,000 degrees Celsius. The workers were convinced they hadn't just drilled into the crust, they had broken through the ceiling of hell itself. While the screaming audio was later proven to be a clever hoax or a recording of geological gas sounds, the atmosphere at the site was genuinely eerie. The physical reality of the hole was terrifying enough, a dark, narrow pipe stretching 7 miles into a boiling, crushing darkness. The sounds echoing up the shaft, the grinding of metal against plastic-like rock, and the high-pitched whistle of escaping gases were enough to make anyone's imagination run wild. The Soviet authorities tried to keep the project's details secret, which only fueled the rumors. People began to believe that the project was halted not because of technical failures, but because the scientists were too afraid of what they might let out. Whether it was the screams of the damned or just the sound of a dying machine in a high-pressure tomb, the Kola Superdeep was no longer just a hole in the ground. It was now a doorway to a place where humans were never supposed to go. By 1989, the Kola Superdeep reached its final depth, 12,262 meters, about 7.6 miles. The Soviets had planned to go much deeper, targeting 15,000 meters by 1993, but the Earth had other plans. At the bottom of the hole, the conditions were no longer just difficult, they were impossible. The temperature was not 100 degrees as predicted, but nearly 180 degrees Celsius. At this heat, the rock behaved like soft wax, and the drilling equipment simply couldn't survive. Every time the engineers tried to push further, the drill bit would wander or get stuck as the hole flowed shut behind it. It was like trying to keep a straw open in a bowl of thick, hot soup. After years of breaking records and breaking equipment, the project reached a dead end. In 1992, drilling was officially stopped. The Soviets had reached the deepest point ever touched by man, a record that remains unbeaten to this day. The achievement was staggering. If you dropped a stone into the Kola borehole, it would take nearly 4 minutes to hit the bottom. The hole is so deep that the pressure at the base is over 1,000 times the pressure at sea level. But despite the pride of the record, there was a sense of defeat. They had spent 2 decades and millions of rubles, yet they had only scratched 1/3 of the way through the Earth's crust. It was a humbling reminder of how small we are compared to the planet. As the Soviet Union began to collapse, the funding for the project vanished. The massive facility, once the pride of Soviet science, began to fall into silence. The thousands of scientists and workers moved away, leaving the giant metal derrick to rust in the Arctic wind. But before they left, they did one final thing: they sealed the hole. They placed a heavy metal cap over the entrance to the abyss, bolting it down with thick steel screws, as if trying to keep whatever was down there from ever coming up. If you travel to the Kola Peninsula today, you won't find a grand monument or a high-tech laboratory. Instead, you will find a ghost town. The once massive 20-story drilling tower has been demolished, and the surrounding buildings are nothing but concrete skeletons filled with rusted machinery and old logbooks. In the middle of the ruins, hidden among the rubble and scrap metal, lies the most important object on the site: a small, unassuming metal cap. This is the rusty plug. It is a heavy steel cover, only about 23 centimeters, 9 inches in diameter, bolted shut with 12 large corroded bolts. Underneath this simple plate is the entrance to the 12,262-meter abyss. There are no warning signs, no guards, and no fences. Thousands of people have stood on top of this cap, unaware that just inches beneath their feet is a vertical drop, so deep it would take a stone several minutes to reach the bottom. Local legends say that if you put your ear to the metal cap, you can still hear a faint, low humming sound coming from the depths. Some believe it's just the wind or the shifting of the earth, while others are convinced the screams are still echoing in the dark. The site has become a destination for dark tourists and urban explorers who want to stand at the edge of the world. It is a strange, lonely place where the silence of the Arctic tundra meets the secrets of the deep earth. The rusty plug has become a symbol of human ambition and its limits. We can spend billions to build a machine that pierces the crust, but in the end, the earth simply swallows the effort. The hole is slowly filling with water and collapsing under its own weight far below. For now, the steel cap holds firm, keeping the 12-kilometer secrets of the Kola Superdeep locked away in the dark, cold silence of the Russian north. While the world talked about screams from hell, the actual data coming out of the hole was far more shocking to scientists. For decades, textbooks taught that the Earth's crust was like a layer cake, granite on top and a solid layer of basalt underneath. But when the Kola drill reached the 7,000-meter mark, it proved the textbooks were completely wrong. There was no basalt. Instead, the granite just kept going, but it had been crushed and transformed by heat and pressure into something new. The most impossible discovery was water. At 7 kilometers deep, the rocks were saturated with hot, mineral-rich liquid. Scientists were stunned. At that depth, the pressure should have squeezed the rocks so tight that no liquid could exist. They realized that this wasn't surface water that had leaked down. It was juvenile water, hydrogen and oxygen atoms squeezed out of the rocks themselves. The deep earth wasn't a dry, dead desert. It was sweating under the immense weight of the miles above. Even more bizarre was the discovery of life. In the samples brought up from nearly 7 kilometers deep, researchers found microscopic fossils of 24 species of ancient single-celled organisms. These tiny plants had been buried for 2 billion years, yet their cell structures were perfectly preserved. Finding evidence of life so deep in the boiling crust suggested that the habitable zone of our planet, and perhaps others, is much deeper than we ever imagined. Finally, there was the gas. The hole was breathing out massive amounts of hydrogen, helium, and nitrogen. The mud used for drilling actually boiled with hydrogen gas as it came back to the surface. This discovery helped scientists understand how the Earth's atmosphere might have formed billions of years ago. The Kola Superdeep wasn't just a hole. It was a window into the raw, chemical laboratory of a young planet, proving that the further we go down, the more we find that the Earth is a living, changing machine. The Kola Superdeep Borehole revealed a humbling truth. Humans are excellent at looking up, but terrible at looking down. While we were sending men to the moon and probes to the edge of the solar system, we had only managed to scratch 0.002% of the way to the center of our own planet. The distance to the moon is about 384,000 kilometers, yet we struggled to travel just 12 kilometers into the Earth. The inner space turned out to be a much more hostile environment than the vacuum of the cosmos. In space, the main enemy is nothing, the vacuum, but inside the Earth, the enemy is everything. The weight of the entire planet is trying to crush you, and the heat is trying to melt you. This is why the Soviet Union and the USA spent billions on the space race, but eventually abandoned the race to the center. It was simply too difficult, too expensive, and too dangerous. The technology required to survive 180 degrees Celsius and thousands of pounds of pressure is more complex than the heat shields on a space shuttle. Because of this, we live on a planet that is still mostly a mystery. We have high-resolution photos of the surface of Pluto, but we still use sound waves and math to guess what the Earth's core looks like. The Kola project was the only time we actually reached out and touched the deep crust. It proved that our theories were often wrong. We are like ants crawling on the skin of an apple, thinking we understand the seeds inside just by looking at the red peel. The inner space remains the final frontier. While private companies like SpaceX dream of colonizing Mars, the secrets of our own survival, geothermal energy, mineral wealth, and the origins of life are buried deep underground. The Kola Superdeep was a brave attempt to bridge that gap, but it showed us that the Earth does not give up its secrets easily. We conquered the sky, but the ground remains an undefeated champion. The Kola Superdeep Borehole was officially abandoned in 2008, but its influence is still felt in every science textbook. It remains the deepest vertical hole in the world. Although some oil wells in Qatar and Russia have since been drilled longer, they are horizontal or slanted. When it comes to pure depth, straight down toward the center of the Earth, the 12,262-meter record set by the Soviets in 1989 still stands unbeaten. It is a monument to a time when humanity was brave enough to try the impossible. Today, a new race is beginning. Scientists in China and Japan are starting their own super-deep projects. In 2023, China began drilling a 10,000-meter hole in the Xinjiang region, using modern technology to try and survive the heat that stopped the Soviets. Their goal isn't just science, it's about finding energy and predicting earthquakes. We are finally returning to the inner space, armed with 21st-century lasers and heat-resistant sensors that the Kola engineers could only dream of. The legacy of the Kola project is a lesson in humility. It taught us that the Earth is not a static rock, but a living, breathing, and incredibly complex machine. It reminded us that no matter how much we think we know about our planet, there is always a deeper secret waiting just a few miles down. The rusty plug in the Arctic is not just a cover for a hole, it is a seal on a time capsule of human curiosity. As we look to the stars for our future, we must remember the lesson of Kola. We are children of this planet, and yet we have barely scratched the surface of our home. The screams may have been a myth, but the power of the Earth is very real. The Kola Superdeep proved that the journey down is just as important and just as terrifying as the journey up. The abyss is still there, silent and dark, waiting for the next generation to be brave enough to open the plug.